October 20th, 2025, you had to see it because the streets of Abuja just erupted in chaos. I am talking tear gas filling the air, water cannons roaring, protesters were scattering everywhere as security forces opened fire. The activist Omoyele Sowore, he later alleged that they were using live bullets, and at the center of all of it, one man sitting in a DSS cell right there in Abuja. His name, Nnamdi Kanu. So the question everyone is asking is this: was this really about justice, or was this whole thing just a calculated political game? Welcome back to Frontline Africa. Today, we are unpacking what might be one of the most explosive protests in Abuja ever since the EndSARS movement. Look, it all started with the activist Omoyele Sowore. He was calling on politicians all across Nigeria, especially in the southeast region, to march for Kanu's release. But it quickly blew up into something much bigger and more controversial. Here's what we know. Sowore, the man behind the Revolution Now movement, a presidential candidate who ran in 2019 and 2023, he didn't just organize a protest. No, he threw down a public challenge. He was calling out Southeast governors, Peter Obi, even former presidents, demanding they join him in that protest. The mobilization for this was intense. You saw the social media campaigns, the market rallies, hashtags were trending globally. But when October 20th actually came, the government, they were ready. Roads were blocked, arrests were made. We are hearing Kanu's younger brother, Emmanuel, was reportedly beaten and detained. The whole city just shut down. But look, this story goes so much deeper than just one day of chaos. Nnamdi Kanu's journey from a radio Biafra broadcaster to this freedom fighter icon to now an alleged terror suspect, it's a 4-year legal saga. We are talking about what courts have ruled was an illegal rendition from Kenya. We are talking judicial reversals under 2 different Nigerian presidents, international condemnations, and all of it has left the southeast region gripped by violence and these enforced sit-at-homes. His trial, it has become a total flashpoint for Igbo marginalization, for state repression, and for all that unresolved trauma from the Nigerian Civil War. Well, here's the twist. Some people are asking, is this protest really about Kanu's freedom, or is it just a political stunt looking ahead to Nigeria's 2027 elections? A trap, maybe, something designed to fracture the opposition, to weaken Peter Obi, and to distract all of us from the real crisis plaguing the nation. That is hunger, poverty, and unemployment. Could Sowore, whether he knows it or not, be serving some larger political agenda? By the end of this, you are going to see exactly why one man's trial has become the mirror for an entire nation's fractures. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's go back to October 7th, 2025. Omoyele Sowore didn't just call for a protest. He threw down a challenge. His message to Nigeria's political elite, it was bold, it was public, and it was impossible to ignore. He was basically, join me or be exposed. So, was this activism, or was it the opening move in some high-stakes political game? Now, Sowore is not new to this kind of gig. He founded Sahara Reporters, that online news platform. He's the leader of the Revolution Now movement. This is a man who has been arrested multiple times, even charged with treason, all for challenging Nigeria's political establishment. But he's also a presidential candidate, and he has ambitions for 2027. He ran for president back in 2019 under the African Action Congress, and he ran again in 2023. He's already publicly declared his intention to contest again in 2027. He has been saying in interviews he wants to defeat President Bola Tinubu and all the others. So, on October 7th, Sowore issued that public challenge. He called on all those politicians from the southeast who claim they want Nnamdi Kanu released, telling them to just stop the rhetoric. Time for action is now, he said. Let us march to Aso Rock Villa. And he was calling out specific figures, people like Anambra State Governor Chukwuma Soludo, Abia State Governor Alex Oti, and most notably Peter Obi, the 2023 Labour Party presidential candidate who got all that massive support in the Southeast. By October 9th, Sowore had set up the date, October 20th, and that symbolism, it was deliberate. October 20th marks the 5th anniversary of the Lekki Tollgate incident during the EndSARS protest, when security forces opened fire on peaceful protesters. It's still one of Nigeria's most controversial moments of state violence. Sowore explicitly linked these two movements. He was telling crowds later that they were remembering those killed at Lekki while they were demanding justice for Nnamdi Kanu. Now, the mobilization was multi-layered because on October 13th, Sowore visited the Gudu Igbo Association in Abuja. He was seen there right alongside Kanu's legal counsel, Barrister Aloy Ejimako. He was moving through market, talking directly to traders and residents. And on social media, hashtags like Free Nnamdi Kanu Now and Free Nnamdi Kanu, they were trending everywhere. X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You saw the Instagram Reels and TikTok videos showing all the mobilization efforts, all the calls for justice. Sowore, he stated his goal was to mobilize 1 million people to march on Aso Rock. Sowore was framing his message very carefully. At Utako Market on October 20th, this was after security forces had already dispersed the initial gathering. He told the protesters, "We are not here as Igbos, Yorubas, or Hausas," he said. If you look closely, there are a lot of Igbos, Hausas, and Yorubas all united to ensure our brother is brought out of detention. He was linking Kanu's case to those broader social issues. There is hunger, there is starvation, there is political oppression. He was trying to make it clear, this is not just an ethnic issue, it is a social justice issue. But the ethnic dimension were just impossible to ignore. Sowore specifically challenged the Southeast governors and leaders. You had former Vice President Atiku Abubakar endorsing the cause for Nnamdi Kanu's release. Former President Goodluck Jonathan was reported to have promised to discuss Kanu's case with President Tinubu. But Peter Obi, while he publicly stated in the past that there was no need for Kanu's arrest in the first place, and he praised those who were agitating for dialogue, he stopped short. He did not join the physical march. The government response, it was swift, because on October 17, 2025, media reports started coming out that the Tinubu administration had gotten a court order, basically to restrict protests around Aso Rock, the National Assembly, force headquarters, and other sensitive areas. A judge, Justice Mohammed Umar at the Federal High Court, granted an interim restraining order. Sowore dismissed it, called it illegitimate, politically motivated, and he vowed to proceed with the protest anyways. But pushback was also coming from within the Southeast. On October 16th, a faction of the Ohaneze Ndigbo, along with some other Southeast leaders, publicly distanced themselves from the protest. They described this as a thinly veiled attempt at fomenting unrest. They even accused the organizers of exploiting Igbo concerns for political ends. Then another group, calling itself the Task Force and Committee for Free Nnamdi Kanu, put out a statement. They said spiritual and political actions were already underway for Kanu's release, and they warned that this protest could jeopardize those ongoing efforts. Despite all these obstacles, Sowore, he just pressed forward, because on October 20th was coming, and Abuja was about to witness something it really hadn't seen since EndSARS. But you have to wonder, when the smoke cleared, would anyone even remember what the protest was actually about? So, 7 a.m., October 20th, Abuja is already under heavy security deployment. I'm talking armored trucks, water cannons. You have soldiers and police at all major intersections. And then, according to eyewitness accounts and statements from the organizers, the confrontation began. Sowore would later claim live bullets were fired. The government just called the protesters anarchists, but the footage captured on social media just showed chaos, violence, and a city completely paralyzed. Unity Fountain cordoned off. Transcorp heating was blocked. The 3 arms zone was heavily militarized. You had heavily armed police, soldiers, civil defense personnel deployed all across the Federal Capital Territory. The message from the authorities was crystal clear. This protest was not going to reach its intended destination. Protesters had gathered over at the Transcorp Hilton, and as Sowore and his supporters, including Kanu's younger brother Emmanuel and his lawyer Aloy Ejimako, as they began their march, security forces just intervened with force. About 10 trucks arrived as soon as we started the protest, Sowore said later in an interview with Channels Television. There was no provocation on our part. Suddenly, they started shooting at us. Tear gas and some live bullets were fired. This is according to Sowore, the organizer of the Free Nnamdi Kanu protest. Now, the video footage shared on social media, it just captured the chaos. You see crowds fleeing, people being dragged away. Sowore himself was seen running. Emmanuel Kanu and Aloy Ejimako, they were among those arrested. Sowore stated that Emmanuel was actually beaten before they took him to the Nigerian Police Force Command. These arrests drew immediate condemnation. Amnesty International described the crackdown as evidence of intolerance to peaceful protest. Then Bayo Ononuga, who is the special advisor to President Tinubu on information and strategy, he publicly criticized Ejimako, the lawyer. He accused the lawyer of violating professional ethics by joining the protest while Kanu's trial was ongoing. Ononuga stated that rather than focusing on preparing a strong case, the lawyer has resorted to extra-legal tactics, joining a career anarchist to influence the process. Well, human rights lawyer Inebeve Effiong responded. He called Ononuga's claim mischievous and asserted that no law, no ethical rule prohibits a legal practitioner from participating in peaceful demonstrations. These security operations, they paralyzed parts of the city. Federal Secretariat workers were reportedly turned back by mobile police officers who were deploying their tear gas. Court activities as the Federal High Court came to a halt. It stalled the hearing of legal cases, including the police-owned suit against Sowore. Gridlock spread all across the central business district. So, after being dispersed from Transcorp Hilton Hotel, the protesters regrouped over at Utako Market, and there, Sowore addressed the crowd again. Free Nnamdi Kanu now. This is not a tribal issue. It is not a religious issue. It is a social justice issue for all of us. This is according to Sowore. He warned that this government repression, it could fuel even larger unrest. They know that many Nigerians are sitting with anger, he said, not just about Nnamdi Kanu alone, because there is hunger, there is starvation, there is political oppression. But the crackdown is succeeded in its immediate goal. By the afternoon, protesters were dispersed, arrests were made, and the major roads were reopened. Now, the Tinubu presidency, speaking through spokesperson Sunday Dare, just dismissed the protest. They stated that Sowore cannot pull stunts to free terror suspects facing trial, and protests will not be allowed to interfere with judicial processes. Yet, social media was telling a different kind of story. You had Instagram reels, TikTok clips, spreading footage of the tear gas deployment, protesters fleeing, all the security operations, and some observers noted something else. The presence of counter-protesters. They were carrying placards with message opposing Kanu's release, and they reportedly faced no security interference at all. This just fueled accusations that this was all some kind of orchestrated political theater. Back in the southeast region, the protest was having ripple effects. Residents in Abia State reportedly joined demonstrations. A lot of traders in Anambra State observed a sit-at-home in solidarity. Markets were closed, transport halted, communities once again affected by all these ongoing tensions around Nnamdi Kanu's detention. So, the protest was dispersed within hours, but those images, they went viral globally. The question wasn't whether the protest succeeded in its stated goal. It was this: why did the government react with such force? What are the authorities so concerned about? To understand that, we have to go back to 4 years, all the way back to an airport in Kenya, where Nnamdi Kanu's current legal nightmare all began. June 19th, 2021, according to his lawyer's account, Nnamdi Kanu went to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. He was just there to meet a visitor. What happened next? Well, It has been ruled by a Kenyan court as illegal. 8 days of detention in Kenya. Then, on June 20th, 2021, a private jet straight to Abuja. No extradition hearing, no judicial process, just what court will later call extraordinary rendition. And both Kenya and Nigeria, they initially provided very limited public explanation. Now, Nnamdi Kanu wasn't new to Nigerian authorities. He was first arrested way back on October 14th, 2015 in Lagos at the Golden Tulip Hotel. He was charged with treasonable felony, terrorism, and broadcasting offenses, all linked to his separatist campaign on Radio Biafra. The charges all stemmed from his cause for the independence of the Igbo-dominated Southeast states to form the Republic of Biafra. Detained by the DSS, Kanu became this rallying figure for Southeast youths. They saw him as a voice against what they perceive as Igbo marginalization. In April 2017, Justice Binta Nyako of the Federal High Court granted Kanu bail, citing health grants. But then, in September 2017, following a military operation in Abia State called Operation Python Dance 2, which included a raid on his family house in Afara on September 14th, Kanu just disappeared from public view. Multiple reports documented that military raid. Kanu's whereabouts after the raid, nobody knew. The court, well, it later revoked his bail in March 2019 and ordered his rearrest after he failed to show up for trial. So, Kanu remained outside Nigeria all the way until June 2021. According to his lawyer, Aloy Ejimako, Kanu entered Kenya lawfully around April 2021. There is documentation suggesting he was in a Kenyan hospital on May 14, 2021, getting treatment for hypertension and heart issues. Then, June 19, 2021, according to Ejimako's account, this is based on his conversation with Kanu. He went to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to pick up a visitor, and that's when he was apprehended by a group of men. Ejimako stated that Kanu was taken to some private facility, blindfolded, chained to the ground, and held like that for 8 days. Then on June 27, 2021, he was transported to the airport, put on a private jet with Nigerian security officials, and flown to Abuja. He arrived that same day. Kenya's government, they initially denied any involvement. Kenya's High Commission to Nigeria, Wilfred Machage, he stated that Kenyan authorities had not been involved in the arrest. However, on June 20, 2025, Justice E.C. Mwita of the High Court in Nairobi, he delivered a landmark judgment. The court declared Kanu's abduction, his detention, his torture, and his transfer to Nigeria as unconstitutional and illegal. Now, the court found that abducting Kanu, holding him in incommunicado confinement, torturing him, denying him food, water, medication, and other basic necessities, all of it was a violation of his rights and fundamental freedoms. The Kenyan government was ordered to pay Kanu 10 million Kenyan shillings in damages, but Nigeria has not complied with this ruling. Nigeria's own courts, they have offered a completely different trajectory, because on October 13, 2022, the Court of Appeal in Abuja actually discharged and acquitted Nnamdi Kanu. They ruled that this extraordinary rendition violated international law and breached his fundamental human rights. The court struck out several charges and ordered his release. The DSS, however, did not comply. The Nigerian government appealed to the Supreme Court, which on December 15, 2023, reversed that acquittal. Now, the Supreme Court, in a judgment delivered by Justice Emmanuel Agim, ruled that despite the illegalities in Nnamdi Kanu's arrest, including the military raid and his rendition from Kenya, this was not sufficient to stop his trial. The Supreme Court held that an illegal arrest does not divest a court of jurisdiction. Now, this ruling was being very controversial. Critics, including Nnamdi Kanu's own legal team, argue it violates principles of due process and international law. Meanwhile, you've got the United States Human Rights Council Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. In a July 2022 opinion, they condemned both Nigeria and Kenya for what it termed Kanu's extraordinary rendition. The UN body called for his immediate unconditional release and payment of reparations. The working group found that Kanu is being persecuted for the peaceful exercise of his rights, most notably his freedom of opinion and expression. It stated that the collusion between the governments of Kenya and Nigeria made both governments jointly responsible for violating Nnamdi Kanu's rights. Nigeria has not complied with this opinion either. The UK's government response has also drawn a lot of criticism. Despite Kanu being a British citizen who traveled to Kenya on his British passport, the UK Foreign Office has not taken decisive action. Kanu's family even filed a judicial review in London, challenging the Foreign Office handling of the case. In March 2023, the High Court in London just dismissed the case. Judge Jonathan Swift ruled that the Foreign Office decision not to categorically recognize Kanu as a victim of extraordinary rendition, well, that was a matter for the government to decide. This left Kanu's family with no further recourse in the UK courts. Then, on October 16, 2025, just days before Sowore's protest, the Federal High Court in Abuja ruled that Kanu was medically fit to stand trial. This ruling was based on a report from the Nigerian Medical Association. Now, the court rejected requests from his lawyer to move him to National Hospital for an independent medical evaluation. That ruling paved the way for Kanu's defense to begin on October 23, 2025, which is tomorrow. However, Kanu's legal team, they filed a fresh preliminary objection, again challenging the court's jurisdiction, arguing that his continued prosecution violates his constitutional rights. 4 years, 2 presidents, Muhammadu Buhari and Bola Tinubu, multiple courts, international condemnation, and Kanu still remains in DSS custody in Abuja. But his detention, it hasn't been contained within those courtroom walls. It has set the Southeast region on fire, and what started as a legal case has now become a full-blown security crisis that just continues to tear the region apart. Ever since August 2021, the Southeast region has been experiencing these recurring disruptions, and not through voluntary participation, no, through enforcement and fear. Markets closed, schools empty, roads completely deserted, almost looking like what is happening in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon. This phenomenon is called sit at home, and for those who defy it, there are reported risks of violence. The economic losses have been substantial, and it all escalated right after 1 month's detention, Nnamdi Kanu. This whole sit-at-home thing, it began as what was described as civil disobedience by IPOB to protest Nnamdi Kanu's detention, but it quickly transformed into something way more coercive. Armed groups claiming allegiance to IPOB started enforcing these sit-at-home orders with violence. At first, it was just declared for Mondays and days of Kanu's court appearances, but then it spread all across Anambra and Ebonyi states. Markets, schools, banks, transport services all shut down. Residents who tried to defy the orders reported violent reprisals. I'm talking arson, shootings, beatings. Research published in 2025 documented the economic toll. One academic study, it estimated the losses from these sit-at-homes at about 5.3 trillion naira. Transport operators reportedly lose billions every year. Farmers can't access their fields. Students are missing examinations. Businesses have just collapsed. This region, which was historically one of Nigeria's most economically vibrant, it has been significantly affected. The Eastern Security Network, which is described as IPOB's paramilitary wing, has clashed repeatedly with Nigerian security forces. Reports from 2021 documented attacks on police stations in towns like Osu and Oguta, with officers killed and facilities burned. The Nigerian government has alleged that IPOB-linked groups carried out attacks on INEC facilities, burning vehicles and destroying election materials. Government sources are claiming that approximately 175 security personnel, that includes 128 police officers, 37 military personnel, and 10 other operatives, were killed in incidents attributed to these IPOB-linked militias just between 2021 and 2025. Now, the IPOB leadership, including statements attributed to Kanu, himself from detention. They have consistently denied responsibility for these attacks. They insist it's criminal elements carrying out this violence, trying to discredit the separatist movement. They argued that the Eastern Security Network's stated purpose is to defend local communities from armed herders and bandits, not fight the Nigerian government. But the distinction, it has become increasingly unclear. You have got various actors, including these sit-at-home enforcers, criminal gangs, and just individuals claiming IPOB affiliation or operating in these overlapping networks. Now, this insecurity, it's rooted in much deeper historical grievances. The Igbo people have long expressed feelings of marginalization within Nigeria, economically, politically, and socially. The memory of the Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970, during which an estimated 500 to 3 million people died, depending on the historical accounts you read, and that remains a defining trauma. The war ended with the defeat of the secessionist Republic of Biafra, and that post-war reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction policy, it has been criticized by many Igbos as just inadequate, as never addressing the root causes of the discontent. Now, post-war, many Igbos have pointed to systemic exclusion from high-level federal appointments, a lack of infrastructure investment in the Southeast, and policies they perceive as discriminatory. This historical sense of marginalization is what fuels IPOB's appeal among certain segments of the population. The movement frames itself as representing a people who have been denied justice, representation, and dignity within the Nigerian state. Nnamdi Kanu's arrest, his continued detention, that has become the rallying symbol for all of it. For the Southeast youth, especially those born after the Civil War, Kanu represents both that memory of historical injustice and their contemporary aspirations. Social media just amplifies these dynamics. On TikTok, Instagram, X, content related to Kanu, to Biafran history, and calls for self-determination is circulates widely. You have got diaspora networks, particularly in the UK and the United States, that have been documented providing financial support to IPOB activities, organizing protests abroad, and pushing these narratives internationally. That hashtag, Free Nnamdi Kanu Now, has trended globally. It has drawn attention from human rights organizations and international bodies. This insecurity, it also serves various political interests. Dan Iwayanwu, the national chairman of the Zenith Labour Party, he alleged on October 20, 2025 that some politicians and businessmen in the Southeast actually benefit from Nnamdi Kanu's continued detention. He claimed that if Nnamdi Kanu were released, certain political careers would end without him saying a word. Now, why this remains an allegation, it reflects a widespread suspicion about the political exploitation of this whole situation. The Nigerian government, they just frame this insecurity as terrorism. IPOB was officially proscribed as a terrorist organization back in September 2017. The government has conducted military operations in the Southeast states and arrested thousands of suspected IPOB members. But these heavy-handed tactics, they have been criticized for just deepening mistrust, radicalizing the youth, and potentially fueling the very insecurity they are aiming to suppress. So this insecurity, it appears to serve multiple actors, but it's the ordinary Southeasterners who bear the cost. The government uses it to justify security operations. Some politicians invoke it to mobilize support. Criminal elements exploit the chaos for extortion. And Kanu himself, he has become less of a movement leader with any real agency and more of a symbolic brand, just a figure that various actors claim to represent. Which brings us all the way back to that uncomfortable question. Was this protest ever really about securing his freedom? Now, think about it. October 2025, we are 18 months away from Nigeria's scheduled 2027 elections. Sowore, a declared presidential candidate, is leading a massive protest. Atiku Abubakar, who has run for president multiple times since 1993, he endorses the call for Kanu's release. Peter Obi, the Southeast leading political figure in 2023, is carefully calibrating his response. Former President Goodluck Jonathan reportedly promising to discuss the matter with President Tinubu. Suddenly, all these major political figures care intensely about Nnamdi Kanu. But where were these voices in 2021 or in 2022, in 2023? Why now? Why at this exact moment? Now, some observers are arguing this is not primarily about justice. It's about positioning for 2027. The timing just raises these kind of questions because Nigeria's 2027 general election, it represents a major political prize. The opposition is trying to build a coalition. The ruling APC is busy consolidating its power, and every major political actor is positioning for advantage. He ran for president in 2019 under the African Action Congress and again in 2023. He has publicly declared he's contesting again in 2027. Back in February 2025, he was stating in interviews that his goal is to defeat President Tinubu and the others in the upcoming election cycle. Yet, Sowore isn't the only political actor focused on 2027. You have got former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, the one who endorsed calls for Kanu's release. He has been reported to be building opposition coalitions, all aimed at challenging President Tinubu. Peter Obi, who won all that significant support in the Southeast during the 2023 election, he publicly stated, there was no need for Kanu's arrest initially, and he praised those agitating for dialogue. But again, he did not join the physical protest march challenge called by Sowore and former President Goodluck Jonathan. He reportedly met with organizers and indicated he was willing to discuss the matter with the current administration. It has prompted questions. Why this sudden urgency from figures who previously said relatively little about Kanu's situation? Why is this protest being led by Sowore, who isn't even from the Southeast and has presidential ambitions, rather than by the Southeast governors or their traditional leaders? Critics have been raising these concerns publicly. That faction of Ohaneze Ndigbo, they accused the organizers of exploiting the Kanu issue for what they termed nefarious political ends. They described the protest as a cynical ploy designed to destabilize the current administration. Their statement even alleged the whole effort was funded by elements associated with opposition figures, and it was intended to draw Igbo citizens into what they called a dangerous venture. Some Southeast groups even distanced themselves precisely because they suspected these ulterior motives. Representatives of one group, they are the ones who stated that spiritual and political actions were already underway to secure Kanu's release peacefully, and they warned this protest could jeopardize those ongoing efforts. The government response just reinforced this narrative. Bayo Onanuga, speaking for the presidency, dismissed the protest as anarchistic. He accused the organizers of attempting to undermine the rule of law. Sunday Dare, he's the one who stated that Sowore cannot pull stunts to free terror suspects, and he compared the situation to what would happen in America or Europe. The government just basically framed the whole protest as an illegitimate attempt to interfere with judicial processes. But maybe the most pointed criticism, it comes from those who see these protests as just a distraction from Nigeria's fundamental problems: hunger, poverty, unemployment, insecurity that has been affecting the entire nation. Governor Seyi Makinde of Oyo State, he wrote in October 2025 that the only defection that truly matters is when hunger leaves Nigeria. He warned that while all these political elites are engaging in party switching and protest, ordinary Nigerians are just struggling to afford basic necessities. This diversionary theory, it really gains traction when you look at the potential beneficiaries. If the protest mobilizes Southeast youth around Kanu's name, it could fragment opposition unity. And Peter Obi, who got all that strong support in the Southeast in 2023, he faces a difficult choice: join the protest and risk being labeled as sympathetic to separatism, potentially alienating voters in other regions, especially northern Nigeria, or stay away and be accused by some of not adequately supporting the Southeast interest, potentially losing credibility right at home. It's a political trap. Sowore himself, he addressed Obi's absence. He stated in interviews that Obi's camp appeared to view the protest as an attempt to steal the show. But critics are wondering, was this trap deliberately constructed? Think about it. If Sowore can position himself as more committed to Southeast interests than Peter Obi, he could attract votes from Labour Party supporters in 2027. If opposition figures can be forced into these uncomfortable alliances or positions, it benefits those who are seeking to divide them. And if the ruling party can keep the opposition fragmented and distracted by identity politics, well, their electoral prospect improves. Now, Sowore, he rejects these characterizations. He has stated in interviews he is not working in coordination with Atiku or Jonathan or Peter Obi, and that he has consistently fought for justice and democracy throughout his career. He frames the protest as part of a broader struggle for social justice, linking Kanu's detention to hunger, unemployment, and political oppression. But skepticism persists among some observers. If this protest is genuinely about justice, why organize it in October 2025, right as the election season is heating up? Why not back in 2021 when Nnamdi Kanu was renditioned, or in 2022 when the Court of Appeal ordered his release? The answer, it might just lie in the very nature of Nigerian politics, where activism, ethnicity, and electoral ambition, they often intertwine. In this environment, Nnamdi Kanu, he has become not just a detained individual, he has become a brand, a symbol, a mobilizing tool. And observers note that whoever effectively controls or claims that brand, whether it's Sowore, Peter Obi, Atiku Abubakar, or even the ruling party, they gain leverage in the 2027 contest. But the most controversial aspect of this whole analysis, it concerns who the protest might really be targeting, because there is one political figure who has so much to lose and very little to gain from this moment. I'm talking about Peter Obi. And some analysts, they believe the trap set for him was nearly perfect, which is why some observers suspect Sowore, whether he intended it or not, may be serving interest far beyond simple activism. Once, Nnamdi Kanu was known primarily as a voice. He was the broadcaster on Radio Biafra, rallying segments of Southeast youth with messages of Biafran identity and self-determination. He was seen by his supporters as their champion, their icon. But 4 years in detention, it appears to have transformed his role. He has become less of a leader with any agency and more of a symbol that others are claiming ownership over. A figure invoked by forces that might actually benefit more from his imprisonment than his freedom. Kanu's trajectory, from that activist broadcaster to this political symbol, it's revealing. As the charismatic founder of Radio Biafra, broadcasting from London, Kanu commanded significant loyalty among Southeast youth. They saw him as giving a voice to their feelings of marginalization. His arrest in October 2015, his release on bail in 2017, his disappearance from the military raid, and then his rendition from Kenya in 2021. Each one of these events just elevated his symbolic status. But as his detention has continued, through all the judicial battles, the political changes, the international controversy, Kanu's image has shifted. He has become less of an active political leader and more of an object of political contestation. Politicians are invoking his name for all kinds of purposes. Sowore, he's using his case to mobilize protest and position himself as a justice advocate. Atiku Abubakar, he's endorsing calls for his release while he's building opposition coalition. Peter Obi, he's expressing support for dialogue while maintaining this careful distance from any direct action. And the ruling party, they are using his status as a detained terror suspect to paint opposition figures as being sympathetic to separatism. That October 20th allegation from Dan Iwanyanwu, it really captures the perverse incentives. He claims some Southeast elites actually want Kanu to remain detained because his release would end their political relevance without him saying a word. Again, this is an unverified allegation, but it reflects this widespread cynicism about political exploitation of the situation. Even IPOB itself has fractured. You have got the mainline faction represented by Kanu's lawyers who are advocating for non-violent legal and political strategies. Then, you have a breakaway faction previously led by Simon Ekpa, that Nigerian Finnish citizen who was arrested in Finland back in 2024 and charged with terrorism-related offenses. That faction enforced the violent sit-at-homes and carried out attacks, all the while claiming to act on Nnamdi Kanu's behalf. Kanu himself, through his lawyers, has disavowed these violent tactics. But from detention, his ability to control the movement that bears his name, it has been severely constrained. Social media really reveals this transformation because early in his activism, Kanu's Radio Biafra broadcast and his social media presence, they galvanized followers with this message of pride and self-determination. His supporters saw him as an organic leader of a grassroots movement. But by 2025, the online discourse about Kanu is all mixed. It's genuine cause for justice mixed with political positioning. Some social media users are expressing frustration, suggesting we are being used. Others are questioning whether this current protest truly serve Kanu's interest or if they might just complicate the effort for his release. Now, the international dimension. It just further illustrates Kanu's reduced agency. As a British citizen, he should theoretically receive UK government protection. Yet, the British Foreign Office, they have declined to categorically recognize him as a victim of extraordinary rendition. And the UK courts, they dismissed his family's legal challenge. Kenya's High Court ruled his rendition illegal, but Nigeria has ignored that judgment. The UN Working Group called for his immediate release, but Nigeria dismissed that opinion. In every single instance, Kanu just becomes a test case for the limits of international law and state sovereignty. He's just a figure being moved by geopolitical forces way beyond his control. For the Southeast youth, again, especially those born after the Civil War, Kanu represents both that historical memory of Biafra and their contemporary grievance about marginalization. But they are increasingly seeing a figure whose fate is being shaped by forces beyond his control or their direct control. His detention has become a rallying point, but it's also potentially a trap. It's drawing communities into these circles of protest, repression, and disillusionment, all without any clear resolution. The irony is stark. A man who sought to mobilize a people for self-determination has himself become captive, and not just to the Nigerian state through physical detention, but to the political calculations of those who claim to be fighting for him. Whether he will ever regain agency over his own movement, or whether he will just remain a symbol manipulated for various political ends, that remains uncertain. So, if Sowore is not simply an activist, and this protest is not simply about justice, what larger forces might be at work? And could the ruling party itself be the one benefiting most from this ongoing controversy? Alright, so here is the trap facing Peter Obi. If he joins the protest physically, he risks being labeled as Biafran sympathizer. Now, in Nigeria's complex ethnic and regional politics, such a label could cost him millions of votes in regions where the memories of the Civil War are still sensitive, particularly in northern Nigeria. But if he stays away entirely, he risks being accused by some of abandoning Southeast interest, the very region that gave him that overwhelming support in the 2023 election. Either choice, it carries political risk. It is a difficult position, and as we said, some observers are wondering if this political checkmate was constructed deliberately. Let's just examine the dynamics explicitly. Option 1. Obi joins the protest physically. The ruling party and its supporters, they immediately paint him as sympathetic to separatism. He potentially loses support in regions where he already struggled in 2023, especially in the north. Option 2. Obi stays away completely. Some accuse him of not adequately championing Igbo interest. He potentially loses credibility in his own home region. And Sowore or other figures get to position themselves as more committed to Southeast interest. Peter Obi faces a political cost. So, Obi chose a measured approach. He publicly stated that, yes, there was no need for Nnamdi Kanu's arrest in the first place. He praised those who were calling for dialogue and a political solution, but he did not join the physical march, and he didn't prominently amplify Sowore's campaign. This drew criticism from Sowore, who, as we said, stated in interviews that Obi's camp appeared concerned about still the show dynamics, suggesting they just viewed the protest as political theater. Obi, he didn't publicly respond to those specific accusations. Some political analysts, they are arguing this measured response actually serves multiple interests. Just consider what Sowore's protest accomplishes, regardless of his intent. 1. It fragments opposition unity. It creates competition for Southeast political leadership, right between Obi, Sowore, and potentially Atiku. 2. It forces Obi into that uncomfortable position we just described. 3. It shifts the public discourse away from governance failures, economic hardship, and infrastructure collapse, and towards identity politics and ethnic grievances. And 4. It creates optics, allowing the ruling party to characterize opposition figures as being aligned with what the government calls terrorism and separatism. Now, examine the potential benefits to the APC, the ruling party. The ruling party gets to authorize a security crackdown on the protest, claim to be defending national unity, and discredit opposition figures all at the same time. Meanwhile, keeping Kanu detained, it maintains a certain level of insecurity in the Southeast. This can be used to justify security spending and potentially even complicate electoral processes in that region. The continued controversy allows the government to frame itself as the one standing against separatism, while painting the opposition as sympathetic to division. And just consider what gets obscured, what gets hidden. Why these protests dominate all the headlines. Over 5 trillion naira in economic losses to sit-at homes, according to those research estimates. Millions of Nigerians facing food insecurity and hunger. Youth unemployment at concerning levels. Infrastructure deficits affecting everyone's quality of life. But the media coverage, the public discourse, is focusing overwhelmingly on Kanu, Biafra, and the protest confrontation. The fundamental governance challenges, the ones affecting all Nigerians, they receive far less attention. So, Obi's measured response, avoiding being drawn fully into that trap, it appears strategically calculated. He expressed support for dialogue. He indicated Kanu shouldn't have been arrested in the first place, which maintains his credibility with Southeast supporters. But by not joining the physical march, by not being prominently associated with Sowore's campaign, he avoided providing ammunition for those who would love to label him as a separatist sympathizer. He just refused to be baited into a position that would definitely harm his broader political prospects. So, was this protest fundamentally about Nnamdi Kanu and justice, or was it about positioning for the 2027 elections? The answer, it may genuinely be both. Kanu's case does involve real legal irregularities. A Kenyan court did rule his rendition illegal. The UN did condemn it. These are legitimate justice concerns. But those legitimate concerns are being leveraged. They are being used within a political context where multiple actors have interests that go beyond simply securing Kanu's freedom. What appears clear is this: as long as Kanu remains in detention, he functions more effectively as a political symbol than he ever would as a free man. As long as politicians can invoke his name to mobilize support, to attack opponents, or to distract from governance failures, his continued detention serves multiple political interests. His freedom, paradoxically, it may be the one outcome that the fewest political actors actually prioritize, despite all their public statements. So the question facing Nigerian voters as 2027 election approaches isn't simply who's going to win the elections. It is whether voters can recognize when their genuine grievances are being weaponized for political advantage, whether they will see through these strategies that prioritize electoral positioning over substantive solutions, whether they will demand accountability for governance failures rather than being distracted by identity politics. The answer to these questions is going to shape not just the next election, but the future trajectory of Africa's most populous nation. Now, if you have watched to this point, this is Frontline Africa, where we talk about geopolitics from Africa's own point of view, where we bring you the stories with the kind of details mainstream media does everything to avoid. In this particular story today that unfolded in Abuja yesterday is a serious matter. A legal proceeding in Nigeria that has gone through 2 presidents over the last 4 to 5 years. And it's a sensitive matter, a very sensitive matter. And that is why I have tried my best to adhere to facts and facts only. And if you are in Southeast Nigeria, or if you are in Nigeria or interested in African politics, go to the comment section and drop your opinion. Tell us what you feel about this whole Free Nnamdi Kanu protest that Sowore himself is organizing. Do you think this is a genuine concern for Nnamdi Kanu's freedom, or he's just using Kanu to play politics ahead of the 2027 elections? And more importantly, do you think the ruling party benefits from this whole situation than the opposition? Go to the comment section and tell us what you think. And if you want to see more of my videos, maybe consider to subscribe and turn on those notifications. I am your host, Ezekiel Enejeta, and I will see you in the next one. It's a bye-bye for now.